is officially official visit season for the 2026 recruiting cycle. So, the Gophers have one of their biggest recruiting weekends of the year this weekend, and it's called Summer Splash. So, I want to start out this video for the people that might not know what Summer Splash is. It's just a Gophers thing. That's the name they use. Um, as long as I've been covering the team, and I believe PJ Fleck has done this every year he has been head coach of Minnesota. Um, they give a name for it, but they have 2 weekends in the late spring, early summer, where they host the majority, if not all, of their official visits in that specific recruiting cycle, high school recruiting cycle, for 2 different weekends. So every team across the country does official visits during this time period. The Gophers have just knocked out 2 weekends typically every year where they do all of their work. So this weekend they'll host 18 different 2026 recruits, and eight of which, or not 18, 26. They'll host 18 uncommitted 2026 recruits and eight more that have already verbally committed to Minnesota. So that means it's a big weekend for their 2026 class. And I guess right off the bat, before I get into the specifics of each player, um, high school recruiting has a much different meaning than it did 5 years ago, if not 10 years ago. But I still think it does matter a lot for roster building, especially at a program like Minnesota. And I think it'll correct itself a little bit in the next 5 to 10 years to mean a little bit more. And I think we're going to see a little more roster retention across the country with the introduction of revenue sharing and more regulation and more rules for this for the transfer portal for NIL. But just right off the bat, the Gophers this year for their 2025 roster, their best players were high school recruits. Anthony Smith committed to the Gophers out of high school. Darius Taylor committed to the Gophers out of high school. Coy Parrish committed to the Gophers out of high school. Their starting quarterback, Drake Lindsay. Jamison Gears, tight end. Greg Johnson and Ashton Beers up front, the offensive line. The defensive line, Jalen Logan Redding, Devin Eastern. I could go on and on. Zaquan Bryan, Kerry Brown. But you do have a few transfer portal players that are projected to start, like Javon Tracy, Logan Loya. A lot of guys up front on the offensive line, Marcellus Marshall, Jaden Ball, and a couple on defense, like Jackson Howard, Jeff Roberson, Jalen Bowden. So what I'm getting at is I personally think it still means a lot for roster construction. I can see fans' frustration of realizing that a verbal commitment doesn't mean as much as it once did, and really even a national letter of intent, which technically I don't think exists anymore, doesn't really mean much because you're allowed to transfer whenever you want. But I think it's still a big deal. And this weekend is huge for the Gophers 2026 class. Most of this video, I'll talk about some players that are uncommitted that could commit to the Gophers in the near future. But there will be 8 players who are already verbally committed to the program. And as I mentioned, the recruiting really never stops. They can totally be like, I want to go to a different school. So, still a big weekend for those recruits to make sure they stay committed to the program and ultimately sign during early National Signing Day this December. So, those recruits include Andrew Trout, offensive tackle from Rocori, Minnesota, Howie Johnson, defensive tackle from Forest Lake, Minnesota, Owen Lansu, quarterback from Downers Grove, Illinois. Justin Hopkins, cornerback from Tennessee. Rico Blasingame, wide receiver from Arizona. Gavin Mayer, the offensive tackle, he'll be on campus in June, the second weekend. Kai Meza will be on campus this weekend, wide receiver from Utah. Hayden Moore, wide receiver from Florida. And Hudson Dunn, a linebacker. Ezekiel Bates will be with Mayer for that second Summer Splash weekend later in June. So those are some big time recruits. Trout, Johnson, and Hopkins at the top of the list. Three really solid 4-star recruits on some services that will matter for the Gophers to keep committed. Hopkins is one guy who I can foresee being pursued by a lot of programs throughout the process. I'm not implying that he has second thoughts on his Gophers commitment at all. I'm under the impression he's still very committed to the Gophers, as much as he was when he initially said he was committed. But that doesn't mean other programs will stop trying to recruit him. Howie Johnson and Andrew Trout, two in-state guys, I fully expect to stay committed. Owen Lansu, again, a player that I interviewed on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel, seems very committed to the Gophers. And then Rico Blasingame, Kai Meza, two wide receivers that committed early in the process, seem committed. But Hayden Moore has an official visit scheduled to Penn State. So that one will be interesting to monitor because that means he might be having second thoughts on his commitment. But still pledged to the Gophers. So this weekend will be big to see if they can keep him committed. And then lastly, Hudson Dunn, a really underrated linebacker that should be pursued again by a lot of top programs. I don't think he has any other official visits currently set up, but big weekend for him too. So that is 8 total players that'll be on campus that have already verbally committed. Um, and it's interesting because the Gophers can help them or use them to help recruit some of these uncommitted guys and say, hey, you should come to this program, commit to this program. And that stuff does happen. Uh, I've spoken to recruits in the past, and this weekend is typically, the program takes them out um, on some of the lakes, maybe shows them around Minnesota. Normal things you would see on a recruiting visit, maybe a nice dinner, show them the program, meet some of the players, stuff you would expect. So um, that is kind of what goes on behind the scenes here. But so out of the 18 uncommitted players that will be visiting, right off the bat, Roman Voss, tight end from Jackson, Minnesota, the number one player in Minnesota, arguably the best recruit to come out of Minnesota since Coy Parrish. He'll be making his decision between Alabama and Minnesota. He's a guy that we're not going to see commit this week because he's going to take an official visit to Alabama. So we'll likely see his commitment later in the process, probably sometime later this summer. Top of my head, I can't remember if he said a date specifically that he'll be committing, but it is Minnesota or Alabama. So Minnesota's first, though, which I think does play a big role and a big factor on this because when he goes to Alabama, he's going to be comparing it to Minnesota. When he goes to Minnesota, he's not going to be comparing it to anything. So that'll be interesting to monitor, but far and above the top target in this class, a class-changing prospect if they can get him to put pen on paper. Next, Pierce Peterson, another guy who's in that top 4 players in Minnesota. Arguably number 2, might be 3 or 4 on some other sites. He is a guy who will likely take official visits elsewhere. I would be surprised if he committed to the Gophers this weekend, but Penn State is the other school they got to compete with here. Minnesota's been recruiting Peter Schonhart, maybe wants him more at a linebacker position, and Penn State more wants him at tight end. He plays quarterback in high school, but really interesting player. Another guy I was fortunate enough to interview. Really nice recruit and person. Um, and a big weekend for the Gophers. Again, same reason. He hasn't visited elsewhere, getting him to do Minnesota first, in state guy, if they can close the borders. Him and Voss, if they can get both of them, I truly think this could be one of PJ Fleck's best recruiting classes, if not the best. Because those are legit 4-star recruits that typically don't come through Minnesota often, and those are the guys heading into year 8 at the helm you need to keep in Minnesota, because you've proven, as PJ Fleck has, you can develop NFL talent. You can win games. You can win big games. There's going to be big games at home. You can develop superstars like Coy Parrish. So use that in your recruiting pitch and keep these two guys home. Totally possible and totally fair expectation at this point for Fleck and his staff. So those are the only two uncommitted in-state players that will be on campus. I think the third biggest target in this group is Jaden McGregory, safety from Des Moines, Iowa. Arguably the number one player from Iowa, a guy the Gophers have been interested in for a while. Another guy I doubt that he'll commit this weekend. He said it will commit July 7th, so I'd be quite shocked if he committed this weekend. Everything's always up in the air. That can change. You'd be like, hey, I can commit now. There's no rules about that. So um, he'll probably take other official visits, but then again, Gophers were first. Big piece in his recruitment there. So um, another guy to monitor, but I doubt he recruits or commits this weekend. So that leaves 15-ish players that could commit this weekend. And so some I guess separating these a little bit. Right off the bat, Freddie Wilson, a Florida defensive lineman, a guy that I get the feeling is the Gophers are kind of on the outside looking in there. Winston Delatz-Badair was very big in his recruitment right away. And now Delatz-Badair with the Cardinals. Wilson has considered Miami and Georgia Tech a little bit more. This is a visit he's had scheduled for a while. It'd be, I think he'd have to be blown away by Minnesota to be heading north. But he's a guy that I just don't foresee committing to the Gophers. I could be wrong. Opinions can change. All this is very fluid, but he's one guy I'm going to put at the bottom here. So that leaves then 14 players that I could see committing. Damon Ferguson, running back, true 4-star running back. Jaden Everett, the new Gophers running backs coach, has been active in the recruiting trail. He's got Damon Ferguson and the king of the all-name team, Sir Paul Cheeks, coming on campus this weekend. Sir Paul Cheeks might be the best name I've ever heard. But if the Gophers can get either one of those guys pair with Ezekiel Bates, I think that's a good running back class. Ferguson, a 4-star guy on 247 Sports, so that would boost their recruiting ranking a little bit as a class. And Gophers don't get many 4-stars, so that'd be a guy that he could commit this weekend. That would be huge if they did. And I was wrong. I forgot about another running back, Deuce Olson the second. So those three I would kind of rank in that order. I mean, I haven't been in person watching their games like the coaches, but those are the order of their recruiting rankings on 247 Sports. Ferguson would be huge, and I think he's probably he is the most highly touted player on this list that I could realistically see in verbally committing to the Gophers this weekend. But Sir Paul Cheeks and Deuce Alston the second, two more really talented running backs worth keeping an eye on. So some other players on this list. Matali Benjamin, offensive tackle from Lehigh, Utah. A very talented player that would be a solid pickup for Brian Callahan and the Gophers offensive line. Seems like they are very in the mix there. Totally a player I could see committing this weekend. Um, and he is one of three offensive linemen that will be on campus, along with Daniel McMorris from Norman, Oklahoma, and Malachi Joyner from Gilbert, Arizona. If I had to do the likelihood of them committing, I'd put Benjamin Joyner and then McMorris. Joyner's not really being pursued by many other programs right now, and those are typically the guys that you see commit early in the process. He is one I definitely could see committing this weekend. Um, so he's worth keeping an eye on. And then, all right, there's one more offensive player I'll talk about. Preston Frizel, tight end from Toledo, Ohio. The Gophers have had a little movement in the tight end space. They had Mason Bonner, I believe his name was, commit to Michigan. He was a guy they were pretty interested in, and they don't have a tight end yet committed to their class. Sometimes they like to get two per class, and Frizel's the only one that'll be on campus this weekend. Another guy that I could totally foresee verbally committing to the program. And then on the defensive side of the ball here, we got Angel Luciano. If I had to rank players by likelihood of them committing, he'd be up there, but he's also being pursued by Michigan State. So another guy, if the Gophers can get him to verbally commit before he even checks out Michigan State, that would be huge. And something that does happen from time to time. We see that with transfer portal guys a lot as well. Um, Former Gophers D coordinator Joe Rossi has been recruiting him hard. So that'll be an interesting one to monitor. Another guy here, we got Anthony Charles, defensive end from McDonald, Pennsylvania. Gophers recruiting against another Big Ten school for him. They are recruiting against the Badgers of Wisconsin. And I think very similar situation to Luciano there. I think he might want to check out the Badgers first. But in the same vein, if the Gophers can get him to commit now and be like, hey, don't even check out the Badgers. If the visit goes that well, totally something that could happen. But that's another situation worth monitoring. And then the last defensive lineman here, we got Aiden Atch, a guy who's currently committed to Northern Illinois, but his recruitment has heated up precipitously over the last few weeks. Um, he's a guy, but he's visiting Minnesota first. I believe Kentucky, Purdue, a couple other schools in the mix there. Another situation. I'll reiterate the fact that the Gophers are getting him on campus first out of any other program is a big win in itself. And if they can get him to commit before even checking out those programs, that'll be one to monitor. And then we have Cyril Howard, another guy that I kind of feel like is in the same boat as Freddie Wilson. Seems like the Gophers have just cooled on him a little bit, but he's still scheduled to visit and he's still scheduled to be on campus. So you never know. And then lastly, some cornerbacks here. If I put Malachi Joyner at number one as guys I'd see commit this weekend, I think Chance Payne might be number two. I could be persuaded into putting him number one even. A guy who I believe Minnesota is his only Power Four offer. Those are guys you're going to see commit early in the process. So he's worth keeping an eye on. Darian Jones, a underrated cornerback from Nebraska, who behind Damon Ferguson, if you're looking at social media this weekend, I think he is probably the second most highly touted player who could realistically commit this weekend. So if the Gophers are able to get either one of those two to commit, that'd be big. And it'd be a big win. And then Tristan Hill, safety from Suwanee, Georgia. Another guy who I'd probably put in that next tier of recruits I could see committing this weekend with Frizel, and kind of those defensive ends I mentioned. So there we have it. It's going to be a busy weekend for the Gophers on the recruiting trail. I expect we see anywhere from 5 to 10 commitments. Like I mentioned, don't panic if we don't see something from Voss, Petershon, or McGregory. Those are probably going to happen later in the process. They are the cream of the crop of this class, so um, they're going to need a lot of time to make their decisions. If we do see any of them make a decision, that would be a huge win for the Gophers and completely change the outlook of their class. But make sure you follow Gophers on SI. We got a tracker going of all the news this weekend. I assume it's probably going to be a little bit, maybe late Saturday. It usually is Sunday into Monday. We see some commitments. So keep an eye on Gophers on SI. The Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, help us get found a ton. And then any other Minnesota sports news on Timberwolves, Vikings, and Twins on SI, make sure to keep an eye out for that stuff. And as always, I appreciate you guys for listening, and until next time.